This show the establishment warned you about.
That's right, it's the Dr. Tommy Show. We're glad you're here. Broadcasting from the free state of Florida, where the great Governor Ron DeSantis is our governor. And we are so happy that he's our governor. I saw someone said just the other day after, we're going to cover this today, but after the Surgeon General of Florida, Dr. Ladapo, came out recommending against the COVID vaccine for adult males aged 18 to 39, I believe it was. They've already, I think they've already recommended for children not to get it. But anyway, there was a study that they released, and it showed that there was dangers of it from 18 to 39. We're going to cover that. But anyway, someone said that Florida is basically its own country now, and we're so glad so glad for the federalism that we have been able to enjoy under our governor. I was going to say President DeSantis, but our governor DeSantis. People haven't been in a free state. Some people haven't been in a free state. When they come to Florida, they feel like they're in a free state, and it feels different for them. I see that a lot of people have said that. Dave Rubin said that when he got here, he felt very free. Buck Sexton said that when he came down for vacation, he felt free. And we've had patients come here too from other states, People's Republic states. When they said they came here, they felt free. They stepped off the airplane, and it's just such a great feeling. So anyway, we're broadcasting from the free state of Florida. The Florida Gators had a good week last week. They beat Missouri, and they are going to take on LSU this weekend. And it's a battle of first-time coaches, I guess, since 2005 it was, when Urban Meyer, first-time coaches for both the LSU Tigers and the Florida Gators, since 2005, when Urban Meyer was a first-year coach for Florida, and Les Miles was the first-year coach for LSU. It seems like that was just not too long ago to me. It's 17 years ago now. And it shows you that you're getting old when you start talking like that. But anyway, it does seem like it was just yesterday, but now this week we have first-year coaches for both teams again, and it's Billy Napier for Florida Gators, and for the LSU Tigers, it's Brian Kelly, who is not a new coach overall, but he is the new coach for the LSU Tigers. So that should be a great game, and hopefully we'll win. Like I said, we were going to cover some stuff today about the vaccines. I wanted to also talk about this concert that I just went to, Smashing Pumpkins. If you have the opportunity to see them, I recommend it. When my buddy Spencer came down, and he asked me back in February, I think, or no, not February. It was over the summer. He's like, "Do you want to go see Smashing Pumpkins?" I'm like, "Sure." I always like to go see live music, but then I was thinking, I know some Smashing Pumpkins songs. I wasn't like a huge fan of Smashing Pumpkins, but I grew up during that era when, the Smashing Pumpkins came around. Nirvana, Pearl Jam, Alice in Chains, Smashing Pumpkins, all those, alternative rock, they called it back then. Anyway, so I remember the Smashing Pumpkins, and of course a lot of people know some of their songs, Bullet with Butterfly Wings and Zero and things of that nature. And what I really liked about the concert was I didn't know all of the songs, but what a performance that they put on. It was a very reminiscent of Tool to me, and both the light show, but also the general feel of it was just a little, what do you call it, eccentric, or almost at sometimes kind of unnerving. There was one portion of the show where they played the song Zero, which they had a backdrop of all of these different things, vintage film, and they were playing it along with the music, and it was really bizarre stuff. It was some clowns, it was people dancing. It was there was one portion of the show, or portion of that film, when there was a guy. And they're all black and white photos or films. And this guy's sitting at a table, and he's talking to this little miniature person. And then the little miniature person, she throws up her dress and kind of moons him, and he acts surprised. It's very like vaudeville-ish. And there was a portion where they had these bunch of clowns, small miniature clowns dancing on a moon. It looked like it was just, to me, it's like, I've never been on acid before, but it would be like what you would feel like if you're on an acid trip, and I guess that was the intention. But anyway, Billy Corgan is the lead singer and songwriter, primary songwriter for the band. And it was founded in, I think it was 88, because he said that on stage it had been 35 years since he and James Iha were together starting the band. And there's actually 3 of the 4 founding members are still with the band. The female bass player, Darcy, is no longer with the band. There's a falling out. But otherwise, is Jimmy Chamberlain, James Iha, Billy Corgan on drums, guitar, and guitar vocals, respectively. And then they have a bass player. And then they have a third guitarist as well, because both Corgan and James Iha play guitar, and then they have a third guitarist. So it's really a great show. I encourage you to go see it if you're able to, because they put on a lot of laser lights, and just for those of us who grew up in that era, it's very nostalgic as well. But the songs themselves were very tightly done, and like I said, it was kind of like Tool. Tool's very tightly musically tight, and not a lot of off notes or any off notes. And there's some little bit of banter between songs, but for the most part, it's just churning out song after song. And one of the songs they did play was a Talking Heads cover. Forgotten the name of it, but anyway, it was a Talking Heads cover, and it was the one that goes, "You may ask yourself, how did I get here? You may ask yourself," oh, that song. Anyway, they played it very heavy, very, very heavy. Heavy as anything I've ever heard live, and it's pretty interesting. So go see the Smashing Pumpkins if you're able to. All these bands that are out now, we're living now in this era, and I've said this a lot of times to Tracy. This is an era unlike any other, because we're living in the era of the golden era of both music and movies, where they're going to go away. And in my mind, I think of, for instance, music. Let's say this. The very first rock and roll band was the Beatles. There were bands before that, but most of the time before that, music was individuals mostly. So it was Buddy Holly and the Crickets. It was Tommy James and the Shondells. It was Chuck Berry. It was the Big Boppers. All these people that were individuals, and then the first real band, rock and roll band, was the Beatles. That was big, and so you have the Beatles. And Ringo Starr still performs. Paul McCartney still performs. There's 2 members are passed away. But you have the Rolling Stones, actually, another one of the first quote-unquote bands that is still around touring. So we're living in unprecedented times for that. So we have the Beatles, part of the Beatles are still around. Rolling Stones, part of them are still around. Part of Pink Floyd's still around. There's all these artists that are still around, still performing. And then if you look at the movie situation, look at the performers or the actors who are now movie stars. For instance, the new 1923 prequel to Yellowstone is called 1923, and it's going to star Harrison Ford, another person he's 82 years old, I believe. He was 80 years old. And then we have some of the big stars that are still performing or still acting are very old. This is unprecedented times, because I don't know that the same type of situation is going to happen, let's say, in 30 years. So the people who are 50 now, I don't know if they're going to still be acting in 30 years or 20 years even. So is Brad Pitt, you think of Brad Pitt when I was a kid, Brad Pitt was a young guy. But now he's 55 years old, or he's 57. And so all these people are getting older and older, and they're still around, they're still acting. But as far as music's concerned, I wonder how many of the bands that are around today are still going to be performing when they're in their 60s and 70s. I mean, you look at AC/DC, who cut a record recently. Even as much as I like the Black Keys, one of my favorite bands that's quote unquote contemporary, within the last 20 years, I don't know that they're going to be performing when they're in their 60s. They may. I don't know. It's possible. But I think we're living in unprecedented times as far as the artistry that's still around, still performing. And so if you get the chance to see some of these people, even like I said, the Smashing Pumpkins, Billy Corgan's 55 years old. So if you get the chance to see these people act or sing or perform or whatever the case is, go ahead and do it, because it's very likely that what's her name, Megan Thee Stallion, is not going to be around performing when she's in her 70s. It's very likely that the Justin Bieber will not be performing. It's very likely that any of the people that your kids like, or maybe you like, that are these current crop of talent is not going to be around. It's very likely that whoever the actors are in that nowadays, the young actors, are not going to be around. I don't know if Elliot Page is going to be acting when she's 80. He's 80. So anyway, just something to think about. So this pandemic thing that we've been dealing with now for 2 years plus is starting to unravel. And I kind of got the sense of that when we see these. Oh, let's do this. So the Pfizer has a new booster out now, and they're advertising the booster for 50 plus people 50 and older. That's specifically who they're targeting. Now, this is a departure from what we had been inundated with before. Before, we were told everyone should get the booster, everyone should get the vaccine, and it shouldn't be just 50 and older. Everybody across the board, the young, the old, the healthy, the not healthy, the children, the not children, everyone should get the booster. But now it's just, when you hear the ads, they say 50 and older. That's who they say. If you're 50 and older, you should get the booster, and here's the booster. So we're starting to see this kind of withdrawal, and you're seeing it with the mandates too. They're kind of backing off the mandates, both the corporations and the governments. We talked about before how the military is slowly withdrawing some of their mandates, although they're still in effect. So you're seeing this backing away from this push for COVID. And I was thinking, why is this? There's something that's coming down the pike. And I think it's starting to unravel. And one of the reasons it's starting to unravel is because of people like Dr. Joseph Ladapo, who is the Surgeon General of Florida. And they did a research study. They did a case control study where they looked at individuals who got the vaccine. And I'm just going to let him go ahead and talk and tell you what he found. So this is Dr. Joseph Ladapo, and he was on with Steve Bannon on his show War Room.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't this what CDC or the FDA or somebody, I think it's CDC, isn't this what they're supposed to do instead of just bombarding us? If you're telling us this data was there from a year ago that you could pull together in Florida, you had to work it through. Why didn't CDC come forward? Why did we have to wait for the Surgeon General of Florida to come forward with Florida data, sir?
Well, I'm not at the CDC, but from everything I've seen, they're just incredibly corrupt. They've just done just the most absurd things during this pandemic. The cherry picking of studies to, for example, push the mask agenda, especially among kids in school. They've been so bereft of any integrity that I'm not surprised. I'm sure they either don't ask questions that they don't want to know the answers to, or if they get answers they don't like, those answers get shoved in a desk drawer.
That's a very good point there. So we're not looking for answers. And if we do find answers we don't like, they get shoved in a desk drawer. So what answers did they find in their study? And this is Dr. Ladapo.
We found that there was an 84% increase in the relative incidence, essentially the risk, over a 28-day period after the vaccines in young men between 18 and 39 years old. So 84%. Enormous, just a huge effect on their risk of having a cardiac death. And that was the major finding.
So that's the major finding that they had, that now that's the reason that we are not recommending from the government of Florida that people 18 to 39 get this vaccine or this booster. That is something that should be across all the media. If this was done responsibly, if the media was responsible, if the media was not just pushing an agenda, if the media was not just all in on the fact that vaccines are beneficial for everybody. And so you get back to it and you say, well, how do we get to this part? And, this is not something that is what we would expect because what we would expect is that they would have done something very diligently, and they would have done this in an orderly fashion, and then tried to put something out there that is good for everybody, that's been tested on all the people that need to be tested on, so that they can make sure it's safe. And then so what we have here is this is named Rob Roos. He is a member of Parliament, the European Parliament, and he had a person in front of him in a hearing. It was a Pfizer director, and this is what he has to say about this. This is from his Twitter feed. This is Rob Roos.
And I will speak in English so there are no misunderstandings. Was the Pfizer COVID vaccine tested on stopping the transmission of the virus before it entered the market? If not, please say it clearly. If yes, are you willing to share the data with this committee? And I really want a straight answer, yes or no, and I'm looking forward to it. Thank you very much.
Regarding the question around, did we know about stopping immunisation before it's entered the market? No. We had to really move at the speed of science to really understand what is taking place in the market.
This is scandalous. Millions of people worldwide felt forced to get vaccinated because of the myth that you do it for others. Now this turned out to be a cheap lie. This should be exposed. Please share this video.
So there we go. This is straight from the horse's mouth, so to speak, that this vaccine was not tested to see if it was actually stopping the spread of COVID, which is everything we were told. And I want to go back. I want to play the beginning of part of what this gentleman had to say, because it's pretty interesting. He lays it all out there about what a lot of us are feeling.
If you don't get vaccinated, you're antisocial. This is what the Dutch Prime Minister and Health Minister told us. You don't get vaccinated just for yourself, but also for others. You do it for all of society. That's what I said. Today, this turned out to be complete nonsense. In a COVID hearing in the European Parliament, one of the Pfizer directors just admitted to me, at the time of introduction, the vaccine had never been tested on stopping the transmission of the virus. This removes the entire legal basis for the COVID passport. The COVID passport that led to massive institutional discrimination as people lost access to essential parts of society. I find this to be shocking, even criminal. Please watch the video until the end.
That's where we picked up before. So that's the truth. We were told that if you get the vaccine, that you're a good person. If you don't get the vaccine, you're a bad person. And then all this stuff happened, and then we were starting to see all of these breadcrumbs out there showing that there was not a lot of research going on to show that this thing was actually going to help prevent anything. But that did not stop some people from believing it, and does not stop some people from believing it today. This is a article from the Atlantic. It's called "The Pandemic's Legacy is Already Over, or Already Clear," and it's written by this man named Ed Yong. And so a lot of people have invested emotionally. They've invested a lot of, I'd say that people have gone into this response to COVID more wholeheartedly than anything in their lives, potentially, from a standpoint of trying to impose whatever they believe on someone else. And so this says the pandemic's legacy is already clear. And he's talking about, and I think this is a lot of what drives the reaction of people who are on the pro-COVID pandemic paranoia side. This is what drives a lot of them. And it says here that the U.S. will continue to struggle against infectious diseases in part because some of its most deeply held values are antithetical to the task of besting a virus. Since its founding, the country has prized a strain of rugged individualism that prioritizes individual freedom and valorizes self-reliance. According to this ethos, people are responsible for their own well-being, physical and moral strength are equated, social vulnerability results from personal weakness rather than policy failure, and handouts or advice from the government are unwelcome. Such ideals are disastrous when dealing with the pandemic for two major reasons. First, diseases spread. Each person's choices inextricably affect their community, and the threat to the collective always exceeds that to the individual. To handle such threats, collective action is necessary. Governments need policies such as vaccine requirements or, yes, mask mandates that protect the health of the entire populations while individuals have to consider their contribution to everyone else's risk alongside their personal stakes. And so that's what the basis of this was all built on. So you have you have COVID happen, right? From a lab, most likely. Lab leaks in China, which have completely been gone uninvestigated, except from the WHO saying, yeah, we talked to the people at China and they say it didn't come out of the lab, so case closed. And so did we. We said, okay, case closed. So anyway, so the COVID happens, the virus gets out, it starts spreading all over, it kills a lot of people. President Trump is the president, and he says, we want to have a vaccine. We want to get a vaccine. We're going to do Operation Warp Speed. And that is music to the people's ears who are already developing vaccine vehicles called mRNA, because they've already had this on the shelf. They've already been working on this. It's been a failure so far. They've tried it in other things, and it hasn't worked yet. Most clearly to me is when they've tried it in cancer. There's been a lot of work on quote unquote cancer vaccines. And what it was is exactly what we've done with COVID. You put a cancer epitope into an mRNA and you try to quote unquote vaccinate that person with that mRNA by making the body immune response to that protein, destroy that protein. Then the idea would be you use the body's own immune forces to destroy the cancer in a immunologic response. That's what a cancer vaccine was. Well, so far they haven't been able to do that. Hopefully they will. But anyway, so that vaccine technologies, that quote unquote mRNA vaccine technology has already been there. So along comes Donald Trump. Donald Trump wants to end COVID. He's a problem solver. Donald Trump gets things done, and so he wants to solve COVID. So he comes along and he goes, "I want to do Operation Warp Speed. I want to push this vaccine through real fast. I want to get it out there and start saving lives." Well, like I said, that's music to the vaccine developers' ears, because they're saying, "Well, Jesus, we've been trying to do this for a long time. This guy is on board. Let's go ahead and do this." And so they went along with it. They said, "Yes, you're right, Mr. President. Let's do that." So they played on his ego. And then they developed this vaccine. And then as you hear from the Pfizer executive here, they didn't really test it to make sure it does what it should do, which is prevent infection. They just tested it to see if it made antibodies. And so they tested it to see if it made antibodies. And here we have, then we have it just say, okay, well, we made antibodies. Therefore, that means it's going to prevent COVID spread. Let's unleash it. And we're going to start counting the money. So the vaccine went out. The United States, all these other countries bought up the vaccine, started distributing wholesale to everybody. And then they said, well, it's Operation Warp Speed. It's under a EUA, emergency use authorization. So we're not going to test it on all these different ways because there's not enough time. We need it. It's an emergency. We got to get out there. And because it made antibodies, we know it's going to work. So that's what they did. They let it go. And then it went out there and it started doing its thing. And then there was an initial period of time where we're like, well, it's going to work. It's doing its job. And then slowly but surely, all of the sparkle started to fall off the vaccine. The first thing that happened were breakthrough cases. So when you look back on it, you remember the breakthrough case was the 1 in 5,000 shot. And it doesn't take long to go back in time to see this. This was last year. Just last year, when everyone was rolling out the vaccine for everybody, Joe Biden was saying, if you get the vaccine, you're going to have immunity to the virus. There's a 1 in 5,000 chance that you'll still get infected. Dr. Fauci, or is it Dr. Birx? I can't remember, whatever talking head doctor it was, said, if you get the vaccine and the virus gets on you, it's a dead end. You're not going to spread it. So all of this stuff has been proven untrue. So we know that breakthrough infections are not 1 in 5,000. From my experience, there's no such thing as a breakthrough infection. People who have had COVID get reinfected. People who have had the vaccine get reinfected. People who have had COVID and had the vaccine get reinfected. And people who are unvaccinated get infected. So there's absolutely no there's absolutely no difference as far as I can tell from people who get infected with COVID from who've been vaccinated or not been vaccinated. So we have this is the first thing that starts to fall away. Then we say, well, the vaccine is safe. The vaccine's safe. And then you start hearing all this stuff about pericarditis and myocarditis. And then we start wondering, well, is the vaccine really safe or not? And then if you start saying that, you start questioning whether the vaccine is safe. That's when you start running into trouble. That's when you start getting banned from a polite company, whether it be personally or through your ability to communicate through the public square. So Twitter bans you, Facebook bans you, and all that stuff. So then we come to where we are now, where now we're seeing Pfizer is starting to come out and say, look, we didn't test it to see if it would stop spreading. And then we didn't test it to see if we didn't test it long term. So now we don't know about pericarditis and myocarditis and the risks. And then you see what Dr. Latipo says, and he says his opinion is that the scientific medical bureaucracy who was in charge, once they started looking at this vaccine, quote unquote, they said, we're not going to look for things that are questionable. We're not going to look for things that are potentially shed this vaccine in a negative light. And in his opinion, which I think is probably true, if we do find anything that is negative, we're going to shelve it. We're going to silence it. We're going to deep six it, kind of like what the government does when they find something shady about Joe Biden or Hunter Biden. They just pretend like it never happened. They deep six it. So that's what they've done. And now we're here at this situation where Florida Surgeon General is recommending people not get the vaccine. Pfizer is advertising the vaccine only for people above 50. At least that's the advertisements I've heard. And so we're coming to this pandemic's taken off like a rocket ship, and now it's starting to come down to earth. And now we're going to see some of the real casualties of what's been going on. And the casualties we've already seen. And you're seeing the casualty when you try to go to the grocery store. The only reason that you're paying as much as you're paying for food and much as you're paying for goods is because the government shut down people. Not because of the coronavirus, as you always hear, that the pandemic caused this, the virus caused this. The virus did not cause this. What caused this was the government. Governments caused this. Governments saw the pandemic and they messed up. They screwed up. They shut things down when they shouldn't have. They destroyed people's livelihoods. What they really did that was egregious was they forced people to do things that were against their will. Like this gentleman says, this is what he thought. It says, to handle such threats, collective action is necessary. Governments need policies such as vaccine requirements or, yes, mask mandates that protect the health of entire populations, while individuals have to consider their contribution to everyone else's risk alongside their personal stakes. So this person wrote this in September 30th, 2022. Everything that I've said in the previous 28 minutes is falling on deaf ears for this man. He does not accept that there is anything other than what that he has been told from the very beginning, that if you just get your vaccine, if you just mask up, if you just stay home, if you just don't talk to your family, this virus will all go away. We'll get down to COVID 0, and then we can all go back to our business. This person is exactly the person who is running the Twitter misinformation boards. This is exactly the person who is running the CDC. This is exactly the person who is making recommendations on whether or not people should get vaccines to stay in the military. This person is the person who is driving around in their car with their mask on by themselves because they're scared to death. They believe it, what they were told. They don't question it, and then they still have not adjusted their viewpoint based upon real world experience. And so that's what we're at now. And so this is the whole reason we're, like I said, paying these extraordinary prices for everything. This is the reason that we're on the brink of a global depression. Jamin Dimon, who's the CEO of Citi, I believe, said that in the next 6 to 9 months, we're going to be in a recession here in the United States. If you go by normal definitions, we're already in a recession because we've had 2 quarters now of negative growth. And that's always been the definition. But now the definition is, well, that's part of it, but there's also, you have to have all these other people agree. And So basically, the point is if a Democrat's in office and there's 2 quarters of negative growth, that's not a recession until everyone else agrees it's a recession. So it may be to the point where we're all standing outside trying to collect food from soup kitchens when they'll finally say, look, guys, looks like we're in a depression or a recession. It may be to that point if there's a Democrat in office that it will come to that. If a Republican happens to get in office, they will say the next day, if there's 2 quarters of negative growth, we're in a recession. That's back to the misinformation on the part of the news media. But the point of it is that all of this stuff, if people take anything away from this experience that we've had, this virus, this probably what it was a vehicle that is being developed now to spread something even more serious than COVID itself. That's my opinion. So whatever this thing was that started, whether it came from a bat that somebody ate, that they've been doing for thousands of years in wet markets in China and then suddenly spread it, or whether it was from some prototype germ warfare that was in the Wuhan lab in Wuhan when the Wuhan virus escaped, whether it was that, we don't know. But either way, this virus has caused what we're seeing today. And if anything that people should learn from this is that you should always be skeptical when there is a consensus on something where there can be no consensus developed yet, because we don't have enough information, we don't have enough world experience, and especially if your own intuition tells you, well, maybe something isn't right. And so, like climate change, for instance. Climate change is the only thing that I know that we're supposed to accept as fact without any question as much as COVID. COVID and climate change. We're supposed to accept that the science is the science, it's settled science. There's no questioning it. And also to criminalize anyone who does question it. So if you question COVID, for instance, so this gentleman here, back to this guy, Ed Yong, and the pandemic's legacy is already clear from the Atlantic. He says, to handle such threats, collective action is necessary. Governments need policies such as vaccine requirements or, yes, mask mandates. Okay, so that's what he says we need. What he doesn't say is what happens if you don't go along with vaccine requirements or mask mandates. Because I guarantee you that he pretty much would think that the next step would be some type of forceful action against you. Now, he doesn't say that in here, but I guarantee you, my guess is that his next step would be forcing you to have a vaccine or forcing you to have a mask on. And then if you dare to disagree with him, then you're going to see some gulag action coming your way. And that's what I think too. And so when you have these collective, this widespread belief in something that you don't know is clear, you have to question it. And you have to question it not only for yourself, but you have to question it for those who come behind you. And you have to question it for those who haven't even thought about it. Because there's a lot of people out there who think that the government is beneficent. The government is beneficent. They are only operating for your best interests. And the government is doing things. They think about it a long time. They deliberate. They're not corrupt. They just do things that are in the best interest of people. And sure, sometimes they get things wrong because they're human, but most of the time they get things right. That's the absolute opposite. The opposite is governments are corrupt because men are corrupt. Men and women are corrupt, especially those who seek power. And the other thing is that the only thing to keep these people in line, the corruption, to keep it to where it doesn't become completely corrupt like banana republics, which we're becoming, is you have to have political force. You have to have the force of the people, that means the body politic, to keep these people on the straight and narrow, because their normal inclination, people who seek power, their normal inclination is to get more power. That's just the way it is. That's the nature of man, woman, and man. And so you have to make it politically beneficial for them to do the right thing. That's what Milton Friedman said. You know, we get this idea that you have to elect the right people to Congress. You have to elect the right people to the presidency, and that would be nice if we had this class of angelic people who had the best interest of us in mind, and they got elected, and they chose to run for office, and then they got elected, and they got there, and they just did all these things right, and then we can have things done in an orderly fashion, and we can have just a wonderful existence. That would be nice, but that's not how things work. And so, like Milton Friedman said, is you can't sit around waiting to elect the right people to office. What you have to do is make it politically beneficial for the wrong people to make the right decisions. So his point was, you have to work with who's there, and you have to push them to do the right thing. And that's how you do it. And you do it through voting. You do it through other things, political activity, whether it be speaking or whatever the case is. Speaking, either speaking with your mouth or speaking through your donations through political action committees. That's what's part of the importance of the way we do our system is you have to put your money where your mouth is. So you have to be able to fight back with both speech and also paid political speech. And that was one of the things that was Supreme Court decided was legal, actually, was your ability to do that. So anyway, so we have to have learned from this that there is limits to what the government can do. Oftentimes the government does the wrong thing. You have to be on your guard, and you have to protect yourself from them because they are not going to do what's in your best interest necessarily, because exactly what we talked about here. And I had this clip earlier from Dr. Fauci. And I lost it. But anyway, it was a clip of Dr. Fauci and Rand Paul. And it was Dr. Fauci speaking from years ago because he had blacker hair, but he still had the voice. But anyway, Dr. Fauci was on some talk show and someone calls in and says, Dr. Fauci, should I get the flu vaccine? Because I've already had the flu. And Dr. Fauci says, well, you don't need to get the flu vaccine because getting infected is the ultimate vaccination. It gives you the most protection against infection. So you don't need to get the flu vaccine. So obviously Rand Paul plays this, and Dr. Fauci is sitting there, and he says, well, what about now? Now you've told us before, no matter what, people have to get vaccinated, even if they've already had infection. You don't take into account prior infection or natural immunity. And he goes, well, Dr. Paul, you took that. You don't call him Dr. Paul because he doesn't have the respect for him. He goes, Senator Paul, you took that out of context because what they were saying is if they were already infected, but they had an adverse reaction to the vaccine, should they get the vaccine? And I said, no. Well, basically, it doesn't matter what he said because he said the truth out loud. And the truth is that natural immunity trumps vaccinated immunity. But you don't always want that. You don't always want to get natural immunity. For instance, you can get polio and get natural immunity, but you sure as hell don't want that. It'd be better to get vaccinated immunity. But from the standpoint of public policy, if you have something like coronavirus, which is a respiratory virus, and you get it, there is no way in the world that you should be forced to get the vaccine afterwards. This is exactly what they did. And there should be no reason not to take into consideration natural immunity. And the other thing about natural immunity is that, for instance, from the COVID vaccine virus, if you get infected with the COVID virus, you get immunity to all the parts of the virus. So you get immunity to the attachment, which is a spike protein. You get immunity to the envelope, which is the protein that surrounds the nucleic acid. And so you get immunity to all the different parts of the actual virus. Whereas if you get immunity from a vaccine, such as the COVID vaccine, quote unquote, you're getting immunity only to the spike protein. And the spike protein is mutated. That's why they've come out with this new Omicron variant, bivalent, they call it, the new booster, quote unquote. So anyway, you always have to just, like I've said before, the greatest threat to liberty in America today is the unfounded belief in the competence of the government. People believe that the government's competent, and because they do, there's a whole lot of things that happen that are bad. And if people would only step back and be slightly circumspect about what they're being told, maybe we have a chance. But back to the global warming thing, asteroids killed the dinosaurs. There used to be a mile of ice over Chicago. None of that is around anymore, and none of that had to do with SUVs or cows farting. Yet we're told today that SUVs and cows farting is going to be the demise of us all. It just doesn't make sense. Like I said, if it doesn't make sense to you, you should stand back and question it. couple things about the FBI. So this is the EFF-BEE-EYE. I spelled it that way so I don't get tracked. So maybe I shouldn't call it the FBI. We're gonna cover the FIBE, okay? FIBE undercounts times armed citizens stop active shootings. This is interesting. This is from something called the Crime Prevention Research Center. It says, a study from the Crime Prevention Research Center released Monday shows that FIBE undercounts the number of times an armed citizen stops an active shooting. It says the CPRC pointed to an example of 22-year-old Elijah Dickon shooting and killing the Glenwood Park mall attacker in Indiana on July 17, 2022. They noted a few establishment media responses to the attack. Quote, rare in the U.S. for an active shooter to be stopped by a bystander, from the Associated Press. Rampage in Indiana, a rare instance of armed civilian ending mass shooting, Washington Post. After Indiana mall shooting, one hero, but no lasting solution to gun violence. This is New York Times. It says the CPRC then observed, this is from Breitbart, by the way. CPRC then observed, evidence compiled by the Crime Prevention Research Center shows that the sources the media relied on undercounted the number of instances in which armed citizens have thwarted such attacks by an order of more than 10, saving untold number of lives. Of course, law-abiding citizens stopping these attacks are not rare. What is rare is national news coverage of those incidents, although those many news stories about the Glenwood shooting also suggested the defensive use of guns might endanger others. There's no evidence that these acts have harmed innocent victims. It says the FBI reports that armed citizens only stopped 11 of the 252 active shooting incidents it identified for the period of 2014 to 2021. The FBI defines active shooter incidents as those from which an individual actively kills or attempts to kill people in a populated public area, but it does not include those it deems related to criminal activities such as robbery or fighting over drug turf. And this is the guy speaking who is he runs this place. He says, an analysis by my organization identified a total of 360 active shooter incidents during that period and found that an armed citizen stopped 124. A previous report looked at only instances where armed citizens stopped what likely would have been mass public shootings. There were another 28 cases that we didn't include where armed civilians stopped armed attacks, but the suspect didn't fire his gun. So they're saying, look, we didn't even include these attempts where there was no shooting, but they were going to start shooting. We didn't even include those. Those cases are excluded from our calculations, though it could be argued that a citizen also stopped what likely would have been an active shooting incident. The CRPC notes the FBI reported that armed citizens thwarted 4.4% of active shooter incidents, while the CPRC found 34.4%. So their analysis of the data shows that 34% of active shooting accidents or incidents during that period of time, 2014 to 2021, 34% of the time they were stopped by an armed citizen, whereas the FBI only reported a 4.4%. And back to the talking heads. You may ask yourself, why does FIBE undercount times armed citizens stop active shootings? And that's a good question. The question is likely because the FIBE has a political bent. The FIBE is likely run by liberals who don't like guns in the hands of citizens. And it's probably likely that the FIBE knew for sure that they were undercounting. It could have been circumstance. It could have been accidental, but I doubt it. The government, for some reason, doesn't like individuals. I don't know why it is. It's been going on since the days of King George, and that's why we're sitting where we are now, because the government didn't like individuals in the colonies then, and the government now doesn't like individuals, especially individuals who try to express their own opinions or also protect themselves. This idea of an individual, like back to this guy from the Atlantic, the left doesn't like individualism. It's just one of them things. It goes down to the heart of the matter, the difference between collectivists and individuals. Collectivists don't like individuals. Individuals don't want to be part of a collective. And it's just, I don't know how long it's been that way. maybe forever. I do know that in Mark Levin's book, Meritopia, he talks about some of the philosophers of old, and he talks about how there's always been this group of people who feel like they are smarter than everyone else, and then therefore they need to be in charge of everyone else. And I think that's what we're dealing with, is the people who believe that they need to be in charge of everyone else because they are smarter tend to be the ones who are collectivists, because they feel like the collective needs to do what they think. Like this guy from the Atlantic. The collective needs to think what he thinks. That to handle such threats, collective action is necessary. Governments need policies such as vaccine requirements or, yes, mask mandates that protect the health of entire populations, because I think that, because I'm smart. And if you don't do what I say, I'm going to throw you under the bus. I'm going to bury you under the jail. And I'm going to have the FIBE. And the FIBE is going to go out and say, we need everyone not to carry guns. The FIBE believes that the gun should not be carried by individuals. And if there's a situation where individual with a gun stops a mass shooting, we at the FIBE are going to undercount that, because it doesn't go with our narrative that people need to be disarmed, because I believe people need to be disarmed. I can be armed. Okay? I can be armed. I'm smart enough. I can have guards that arm me. You individual citizens, like Michael Moore says, you can buy a dog. Or if you're in a corporate situation, if you've seen these corporate violence things, they tell you that if there's an active shooter at your office and you're in a corporate situation, because you're in a corporate situation, you're allowed to carry a gun to protect yourself, because you may turn into an active shooter, right? So anyway, if there's no guns there and someone shows up and you're in an environment with no guns, you're supposed to barricade the door with a heavy furniture. You're supposed to throw staplers. If they make it in, they start shooting. I guess you can put a trash can over your head, maybe protect you. I don't know. But this is what they believe. But for them, they will always have guns. They will always be protected. For you, you're not smart enough. You're not part of the oligarchy. You're not part of the inner party, to use 1984 terminology. You don't know enough. So you just have to do what they tell you. This is more information about FIBE from Breitbart. Senior FIBE analyst Bureau offered Christopher Steele $1 million to corroborate dossier. So Christopher Steele's the British spy who was drumming up dirty information to use against Donald Trump, paid for by Hillary Clinton. This is the allegation that's what the case was. We don't know for sure because the FIBE's not telling us. Anyway. The FIBE offered former British spy Christopher Steele up to $1 million if he could prove the claims in its infamous dossier, according to senior FIBE analyst testimony on Tuesday in the special counsel John Durham's criminal probe into the origins of Russiagate. It says, Danchenko, a paid FIBE informant and Steele's primary source for the dossier, is accused of lying to the FBI. Durham is accusing Danchenko of lying to FBI to protect Charles Dolan Jr., a communications consultant with close ties to the Clintons, blah, 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 blah. It says this agent, Brian Auten, interviewed Danchenko and Steele as part of the Bureau's Crossfire Hurricane team investigating an alleged connection between former President Trump and Russia. Auten testified the FBI offered Steele up to $1 million, which was ultimately never paid because Steele couldn't substantiate the claims in his dossier. So they had this guy, Steele, and he's here with this information in this dossier. And the FBI says, well, we'll give you $1 million if you can show us some corroborating evidence for these claims that you have here. And Christopher Steele says, well, I don't have any. It says Christopher Steele was offered anywhere up to $1 million for information which could help prove the allegations CNN reported. In addition to not corroborating evidence, Auten also testified that Steele refused to give the FBI the identity of his sources during their 2016 meeting. So Christopher Steele shows up with this dossier, and he says, here's this dossier, Trump's a bad guy. The FBI says, well, can you corroborate it? We'll give you $1 million if you can corroborate it. And he's like, oh, I can't do that. All right, well, then tell us who your sources are. I can't do that either. So Auten said under oath when Durham asked him, if the FBI had any corroborating evidence for the Steele dossier. He says no. And says, did you have any corroborating evidence when you applied for the Pfizer warrant to spy on Trump, advisor Carter Page? No. It says Auten and other FBI agents met with Steele on October 2016 after FBI received Steele's dossier on September. Despite the FBI not having corroborating evidence, Auten confirmed that the agency relied on the dossier in its initial FISA application less than 20 days after meeting with Steele. So this is what's been claimed all along, that this was a witch hunt. This is what Donald Trump's been claiming all along, and we're told that well, that's just a conspiracy. Donald Trump's lying. Conservatives are lying, and here we are during this Durham investigation, finally getting some official acknowledgement of what's been bandied about for a long time, just like we're getting some official acknowledgement from the people at Pfizer of what's been suspected all along. And I don't know. It's not a good time to be someone who's not on the inner party because people are. I think once you get people on a corner, they start to get more dangerous. That's one of the dangers of Putin now. He's getting in the corner, so now he's getting more dangerous. He's talking about dropping nukes. And then you have a person like Joe Biden who's inept and cannot do anything to diffuse the situation. He just makes things worse. Anyway, so I don't know. What's going to happen when the government gets cornered? We saw what happened in 2020 when the government got cornered. President Trump's in office. He's challenging the establishment. He's trying to drain the swamp. Coronavirus comes around. They enact all these policies to make voting less straightforward, more opaque, more open to corruption. And then they start doing all of these investigations, and they start changing rules outside of outside of the constitutional requirement to use the legislature. Governors and courts started enacting all these rules changes to voting. So they were able to take that election. And now, so here comes 2022 rolling around, 2024. I think you're seeing more and more people become aware that the government is corrupt. So you get people like Woody Harrelson, good left-wing guy, guess you call him a liberal, whatever the case is, good-hearted, believes the government's doing the right thing. Then he was on there with Bill Maher saying that he doesn't trust big government or big pharma with his health. See, this is they're losing people like Bill Maher a little bit. They're losing people like Woody Harrelson. It's going to be an interesting time because, like I said, when governments start to lose control, that's when they start to clamp down even harder. And these people like this guy at the Atlantic, who's lamenting the fact that we have this strain of individualism. Like I said, this guy is emblematic of the people in government. This guy is emblematic of the oligarchy. This guy is emblematic of the collectivists who believe that we should all be under their control because they're the smartest. So people like Bill Gates, people who run the World Economic Forum, all of these big brainy people. They don't like a bunch of little people like you and I telling them what to do or thinking on our own, whether it be on the pandemic or climate change or anything. Anyway, that's it for us today. I hope you are able to subscribe on Rumble or on any of the podcasting platforms so you can keep up with us, and we'll look forward to seeing you next time. So until then, take care. Bye-bye.